I'm events director of Boulevard Events. We're a family-run event catering company based in Hackney, and we cater for all sorts, any type of event, weddings, parties, all of that kind of thing. But I'm not even going to talk about Boulevard today. But the reason I mention it is because you're probably thinking, well, what's this caterer from Hackney doing talking to us about health and well-being? So I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about myself, just to kind of give myself some credibility before I get into the content. This is a picture of me when I was 18, and that was a time in my life when I was, I thought I was pretty happy. I had all the boxes ticked. I had a girlfriend that I was infatuated with, was much better looking than me. I was being paid to play football, which was basically the thing that I loved to do more than anything in the world. I had a job that paid me relatively well and I didn't have to pay any bills. I had a family that supported me, so I thought I had all the boxes ticked. And then over the course of about 4 to 6 weeks, I ended up in a place of really deep depression. And I don't know how many people have experienced depression, but it's one of those things where you don't want to get up in the morning. The hardest thing in the world is waking up and getting out of bed and facing the day. I had this thing where I didn't want to go to bed because I didn't want to get up, and I knew by going to sleep the next thing was that I had to get up. So I used to go and get in the bath at about midnight, and I'd stay in the bath for like 3 hours because it was like it was a buffer between going to bed and waking up. So that was one of the weird mechanisms I had for dealing with it. And I've kind of analysed over the last sort of 10 years, learning as much as I can about health and well-being, how I ended up in that place. But ultimately what happened was, I sat down with my mum, because I had no idea what was going on. That was the hardest thing. I was like, what is this? Like, I must be the only one that feels like this. So I was like, why do I feel like this? I felt like a victim. And then ultimately my mum said, well, you're depressed. And I was like, oh right, that's a thing that people experience, is it? And she said, you know, whatever you want to do in life, we'll just support you. And I was obviously incredibly grateful, and I was in a great position that not a lot of people have the benefit of being in, where I had parents that would support me through that. And ultimately what I wanted to do was study sport, because it was the only thing that I knew that I really enjoyed at the time. So I went off to the University of Essex to study sports science. I did a master's there, researching the performance of young football players. And my whole time there, I was completely fascinated by this idea of performance, by the idea that you can manipulate the human body to become fitter, faster, stronger, through nutrition and sleep and all the other things. And I was fascinated by it. I absolutely loved it. And then at the end of my master's, I came to a bit of a crossroads. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go in my career. And it just so happened that my parents were retiring and the kids were taking over the family business. And I thought, well, I'll go and do that with my brothers and sisters for a little while and see how I get on. And 7 years later, I'm still here, and now I'm talking to you guys about health and well-being. And that's kind of testament to how much I love this industry. I think it's a brilliant industry. I think the idea that you can have an event which is kind of like a project every few weeks or months and just dedicate yourself to that project and then see it through to its fruition is kind of the pure sense of achievement. And it's kind of kept me hooked, but my fascination with performance didn't really change. But what I realised was the idea of performance for the vast majority of people looks much more like health and well-being than it does fitter, like elite athletes. You know, what elite athletes do isn't really that relevant to what we do on a daily basis. What we need is to turn up for work, feeling great, focused, enough energy to attack the day with whatever we're doing. And my fascination with performance kind of turned into a fascination with health and well-being, and that kind of led me to meet Helen Moon, who's sitting here filming us. And I was one of the founders of an organisation called Eventwell. Has anyone heard of Eventwell? Well, now you have all heard of Eventwell, which is great. Eventwell, we're an organisation, not-for-profit, and basically our reason for existing is to provide a resource to you guys who are in the events industry to kind of help you tackle any issues you have on the side of health and well-being. If you go on the website, we have resources to find meditation classes, yoga, just to have a chat with like-minded people. And that's kind of what we're all about. And we just want to be that resource for people in the industry that might be struggling with stuff, that are looking for something, support, or it might just be something casual, like I say, a yoga class or a PT. And that's what we're all about. And then that's what I'm doing. So when I first started getting asked to come and speak at events on this subject, I got quite anxious about it and quite apprehensive, and I got has anyone heard of imposter syndrome? So we all experience it in different shapes and forms. Because it's not my job. I don't get paid to be a health and wellbeing professional. I do know a lot about it because I've been fascinated by it for so long, and I've educated myself on it. But I did kind of have this feeling that maybe I don't really belong on a platform talking to people about this subject. And I pondered it, and I came up with this kind of vision, for want of a better word, that actually people like me and people like you guys who are engaged in this subject actually are in a much more powerful position than the people that do get paid for it, because we work in the same offices, the same events, the same place of work, same building sites as people that aren't engaged in health and well-being, and we share the same challenges. And the people that do get paid for this stuff, they don't. It's their job to become better at looking after themselves. Like, they get paid to learn about health and well-being. Whether we're talking about PTs, health bloggers, health podcasters, nurses, their job is to go to work, and the content of what they do at work makes them kind of better at looking after themselves. But they don't necessarily they don't organise events like we do. They can't relate to you being on site at 2 a.m. So I think I've kind of split us into 3 teams. The green team is those people that get paid to go to work, and they learn about the human body. They learn about becoming better at health and well-being, whether it's nutrition or exercise or sleep or medicine. The content of what they get paid for makes them better at looking after them and other human beings. Then there's the yellow team, which is the team that I identify with, and possibly a lot of you guys, purely for the fact that you're here. You go to work. You might be an event professional, you might be an accountant, a lawyer, you might be a builder or a cab driver. But in your spare time, you go away and you're really engaged with getting better at looking after your health and looking after your mental state and all of that stuff, and learning about it. And then there's the blue team, who are the people that we work with every day, but they don't go away and think about their health. They're not really engaged with it. They kind of come away, and it's in the back of their mind all the time, and they think, oh, I should do a bit more about my diet, or I should try and sleep better, or whatever it might be. But you never really get there. And I've been fascinated with that idea. And I think if we can get over imposter syndrome a little bit, then we can try to make it look a bit more like this. And get it before, and we were talking about this, Lauren, get to it before it gets to a stage where we have a breakdown, or we need to go and pay someone on the green team to fix whatever problem we've encountered. And much like the conversation I had with my mum when I was 18, I believe that we're only ever one conversation or one interesting piece of information or one inspiring fact away from changing our lives, because information's a commodity now. We've all got Google. We can all go on the internet and find out what we want to find out. But the question is, why don't we? And I think if we're all honest, if I asked you, do you implement everything you know about health in your daily lives? You'd probably say no. So, for example, we all probably know that we should drink more, but do we? And I think that a lot of us have got the hows and the whats covered. We kind of know what we should be doing more of or less of. But for whatever reason, we don't do it enough. And there's always that question in the back of our minds, why don't we do that? And what I'd like to do today is, rather than focus on the tactics, the hows and the whats, because I think a lot of you here will have a lot of the hows and the whats covered anyway. I want to talk about the whys, why do we get told to eat more vegetables? What actually happens in the body? Like, why do people say that to us? So I'm going to cover what we call the 3 pillars of health: sleep, exercise, and I've put movement in brackets, which I'll explain in a minute, and nutrition. And if we've got these 3 things covered, we should have our physical health covered as well. So, 4 things we should all know about sleep. A lack of sleep can make you crave sugar.
Just because of the background noise.
Oh yeah?
The noise outside of the room is quite loud.
Is this better?
There's your answer.
I wondered why there were so many blank faces at the back. Did you hear anything I said? Oh, thank God. All right. So a lack of sleep can make us crave sugar. So many of you will be event planners, and many of you would have been on site at 2 a.m. after a 16-hour day. And all you can think about eating is Haribo, pastries, chocolate, all the things we know we shouldn't be eating, right? But our brain's telling us you really want to eat this. And there's a reason why that is. Our brains run on sugar. That's the energy source that our brain uses. And it can't really use it. It can use ketones. Many of you have probably heard of the keto diet, but you have to be in ketosis for those to be available, so we're not going to go into that. But essentially, our brains need sugar for energy. And our brains are really smart. So any time throughout your life when you've eaten sugar, your brain's got a nice kick of energy from that thing that you've eaten. And it remembers where it came from. So when you're tired at the end of a long day, there's a feedback loop built in that says, you want Haribo, or you want chocolate. And it's our brain basically telling us, I need some energy. But what happens is when we reinforce that feedback loop with more sugar, it just becomes stronger. So I guess the takeaway from this one is, next time you're on site at 2 in the morning, your brain's going to be okay if you choose to have something that's a bit more fiber, has a bit more fiber content, maybe some fruits, some nuts, some seeds. You're still going to get those carbohydrates you need, but it's not going to reinforce that feedback loop that makes you crave sugar next time. And then if you keep doing that, your brain will tell you next time that you want seeds or nuts. You'll start to crave the better things. So try not to reinforce those bad habits. If you're aware of it, then maybe we can do something about it. Right. So this one, sorry. Too busy giving you guys water. Some myself. Right, so the hypothalamus, that's a part of the brain that's involved in survival. So all it really cares about is where the next meal's coming from, where the danger is, all the kind of basic survival instincts that we need. And it's also involved in our decision making. Another part of the brain that's involved in decision making is a place called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex cares, it's got a bit more emotion about it. It actually cares whether your client wanted green flowers or red flowers. It cares that your boss wanted you to work at a certain time and you weren't there. So when we're not well slept, when we're tired, the hypothalamus takes over our decision making a lot more. And it makes us irritable. It doesn't let us respond the way we would like to respond to criticism, perhaps. And ultimately, it makes us a less likable person. And if we're well slept, the prefrontal cortex is much more involved in our decision making, and it allows us to make much more mature decisions, shall we say. So if I don't say anything else for the rest of the day, try and remember this one. The glymphatic system is essentially the waste removal system of our brain. So during the day when we get tired, our brain builds up this substance called amyloid plaque. And it's basically like little proteins that clog the pathways of the brain. And we become tired, we become a bit fatigued, a bit foggy-headed. And the glymphatic system is responsible for clearing that. And it's 10 times more active when we're asleep than when we're awake. So the reason why this is important now, Alzheimer's and dementia are now the second most biggest killer in the UK. And we now know that Alzheimer's and dementia are massively linked to sleep deprivation. It's one of the leading causes of Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we're missing out on constant sleep cycles. We're missing out on that bath that our brain gets when we sleep. And ultimately, we're leaving these amyloid plaques in our brain, and we're at risk of developing these conditions. Has anyone heard of telomeres before?
Anyone?
All right. So, telomeres are essentially the best biological marker that we have of how long we're going to live. And what they are is they're the ends of our DNA. So if you think about a shoelace, the plastic bit on the end of a shoelace is essentially what a telomere is to our DNA. And when our telomeres shorten, eventually they obviously disappear. And then our DNA starts to unravel, and we start to develop conditions of old age. It leads to lots of complications in the body, things like cancer. And that's why the length of our telomeres is basically the best biological marker of how long we're going to live before we die of what we call old age. Obviously, if we don't get hit by a bus or something like that. And we now know that sleep deprivation is massively linked to telomere shortening. So we're constantly missing out on sleep, our telomeres are shortening. So the more sleep we get, effectively, the longer we're going to live. So moving on to the diet. Has anyone ever been told to eat the rainbow? Has anyone got any idea why?
All different colours of vegetables.
Exactly. So the reason we're told to eat the rainbow is because we want to get lots of colours in our diet from our vegetables. The reason we want to get lots of colours in our diet is because everyone's heard of antioxidants, right? Okay. So the role of antioxidants in the body is to buffer stress. Stress is effectively the cause of almost all disorders that we encounter. It reacts with cells, causes inflammation, which can lead to complications and different types of diseases. Antioxidants buffer that stress. So we have these things called free radicals, which are produced from different reactions in the body. If those free radicals don't have anything to combine with, i.e. antioxidants, they bind with our cells and they can cause tumours and all sorts of stuff. So free radicals can cause things like cancer. Antioxidants buffer those free radicals. Antioxidants also play a critical role in determining the colours of our vegetables. So the more different colours you eat in your diet, the more different types of antioxidants you get, the more free radicals you buffer, the healthier you are. And that's essentially why people say to eat the rainbow. Does anyone know what serotonin is? The happiness hormone, right? Okay, so this one I found fascinating. And when we say 90% of the hormone serotonin, i.e. the happiness hormone, is synthesized in the gut, and then we think that how many times have we been told that our diet's got nothing to do with our mental health? So serotonin isn't only linked to happiness, it's also linked to digestion. So if you have or you know anyone who suffers from something like Crohn's disease or colitis or IBS, you'll probably know that that's often linked to mental health issues, quite often depression. And that's because they've got irregular levels of serotonin. Because serotonin, the other job that serotonin does in the body is it helps with peristalsis, which is essentially the movement of food along the digestive tract, and ultimately the proper absorption of that food and elimination of it. So when we say that serotonin is 90% of it's synthesized in the gut, we're highlighting that our happiness is directly linked to what we eat, and it's really important. So this one's really important for our industry because I know that everyone loves coffee. If anyone ever tells you that caffeine's bad for you, they're mistaken. Caffeine has a great affinity with the body. It's actually very healthy if it's used in the right way. It can help to buffer different diseases. It can help us focus on things that we need to do. But a lot of people, does anyone know how it works before I explain? All right. So adenosine is a byproduct of any energy production in the body. When we move around, move our limbs, we produce energy, obviously, and adenosine is a byproduct of that reaction. When the adenosine builds up in the body, it ultimately binds to receptors in the brain, which triggers us to release sleep hormones throughout the day and lower cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and ultimately gets us ready for sleep at the right time. Caffeine and adenosine have a very similar chemical biostructure. So caffeine, instead of adenosine binding to the receptors in the brain, caffeine binds to the receptors in the brain, and we don't get tired. So it basically blocks adenosine from doing its job. So the reason why this is important is if we don't have a caffeine curfew, there's no way for our bodies to tell us that we're tired. And if we get into that cycle of, I'm tired at 7 p.m, I need some caffeine, then we don't get effective sleep, then we wake up tired again, then we turn to caffeine. And you can end up in a really negative feedback cycle. It's important to know this because we need adenosine to do its job to get effective sleep. It's not just about falling asleep, it's about getting effective sleep cycles and being in deep sleep. And I don't know if anyone's got the latest watches that tell you how much deep sleep you're getting. They're not the most accurate things, but they're a good marker. And that deep sleep, the amount of deep sleep we're getting is really, really important. And this point kind of comes from a position of empathy for all of us that look at the nutrition world and just think, what is going on here? Because we have all these different tribes. We've got vegans, paleos, keto, intermittent fasters. Everything's kind of the latest diet that really works really well. And it's really difficult for the sort of layperson to decipher it all and work out what makes sense and work out what they should be eating. And one thing I would say, within each of these tribes, there are people that have spent their whole lives studying the subject of veganism, paleo, keto, intermittent fasting, and they're complete experts. There's also very healthy people within all of these tribes, and there's also very unhealthy people within all of these tribes. So it tells me that there's no one diet that works. The only diet that works is the diet that works for you. And the only way you can work that out is by paying attention and listening to your body. And the likelihood is that the perfect diet for you is going to be a combination of all these things. And what we need to be doing is trying not to be so distracted when we're eating. Not being on our phones, not watching the telly necessarily, paying attention to the food, paying attention to what happens after the food. How quickly did we go to the toilet? What was our bowel movement like 6 hours afterwards? And we're so distracted from these things and we don't really work them out. And there's a lot of people out there that go, oh, I can't eat red wine, I can't drink red wine because it gives me headaches. And that's an example of someone that's actually paying attention. And they've gone away and they've gone, oh right, no, I can't eat that food. But not many of us do it. And I think it's really important for all of us. So this is what I mean by movement. So I already touched on the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is essentially the same thing, but for the rest of the body. So it removes waste from the human body. The lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. So the way that it moves waste around the body and ultimately eliminates it is by contraction of our muscles. So if we don't move, we can stagnate. And this is the reason why wearing bras is one of the leading causes of breast cancer. Overwearing your bra can be a leading, really have a real impact on whether you develop tumours. Quite often, the tumours aren't located in the breast, they're located under the armpit. Because there's a really important node there where the lymphatic system drains into the circulatory system and ultimately removes waste. And that can be blocked by wearing a bra too often. And that can be a cause of tumours and ultimately breast cancer. So when we say movement is the goal, if you're someone that goes to the gym every day, and then you go home, you have your dinner, you're sitting down, and then you move to the sofa, and you sit down, and you watch Game of Thrones, or Love Island, and then you go to work, and you sit at a desk, but you got your 1 hour in the gym. But then after that, you're sitting still. You're only really 4%, in terms of health, you're only about 4% better off than someone that's done nothing that day. And the point here is that what we really want to do is try and build more movement into our day. Thousands of years ago, before we had buildings, before we had any of this, we would have to physically get up and go and do everything that we needed to do to survive. Whether that was find food, find a mate, light a fire, find shelter, whatever it was, we'd have to go and do it. So we would have to move in order to do it. All the movement was built into our survival. Whereas now, we can earn a living just by sitting at a laptop moving our fingers. If we need food, we can get on Deliveroo. If we want to find a mate, we can swipe on Tinder. We don't need to go out anywhere to do anything. And now we've got gyms where we can go to the gym and build that movement back in, and we call it exercise. Really, the goal is to move more. And if we can think about that, then maybe we'll get off the bus a couple of stops earlier. Maybe we'll use the stairs instead of the lift, because we'll see it as an opportunity rather than an inconvenience. So, for those of you that do go to the gym, when you step in the gym, you're X level of fitness or health. When you do your session, you break yourself down and you cause stress, you cause inflammation in the body. And that's a signal for the body to adapt and go and get better and go and become more capable of dealing with more of those sessions. That doesn't happen until we sleep. All the benefits of exercise are on the other side of sleep. So this is kind of an exercise sleep point, but we've got to value that combination of everything we do during the day, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's learning a new skill, revising for an exam. Those memories aren't converted until we sleep either. We don't remember anything until we're on the other side of sleep. So all the stimulus that we send throughout the day, we need a good night's sleep before any of that comes into play. So low intensity movement improves digestion and nutrient absorption. So when we eat, we create what's called a bolus. So it's basically a ball of food that sits in the stomach. And then our body throws hydrochloric acid, bile, all of these enzymes that help to digest and absorb the food. If you think of a ball and then loads of liquid thrown on top of it, it's a bit disgusting. It's only getting the outside. When we move around, we have a walk, we move that around and it mixes in and it helps us to digest our food much better. It reduces bloating, it reduces gas, it reduces all these things, and it helps us to digest and absorb our food much more effectively. So, go for a walk after a meal. Right. So this one, I just want to give you something to write down, because the guy that I learnt this from explains it beautifully. I don't want to plagiarise and I don't want to mess it up, but I do want to bring it to everyone's attention, because this, for me, made me reflect on when I was depressed and go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And it's probably one of the leading causes of a lot of the mental health issues that we see today. So the guy's name who's doing the science on this is called Robert Lustig. Surname is Lustig. He's got a book called The Hacking of the American Mind. So, I'm going to bring up two lists, and then I'm going to do a vote. And you can vote for which one you think is happiness and which one you think is pleasure. Before I do that, does anyone think there's a difference between the two? Hands up if you think there's a difference. Hands up if you don't think there's a difference. It's kind of a loaded question, wasn't it? All right. Right, so hands up if you think happiness is on the right. So this is why I think it was so profound for me, because it's something that we kind of all know, but we've probably never sat there and thought, there's a difference between these two. And knowing the difference can have a real impact on our lives. And the reason why they're different, so we talked about serotonin before. Serotonin is a hormone. It's responsible for making us feel content, feel sensations of well-being. Dopamine is another hormone that we kind of bundle into these feel-good hormones. Dopamine is important. And a lot of people will say dopamine makes you happy. But dopamine makes us experience pleasure. And the reason why this is important and the reason why it's so different is dopamine is an excitatory hormone. It excites the neuron, which then excites the next neuron. And our neurons don't like to be excited. They're very tenuous and they die quite quickly if we overstimulate them. So when we experience a dopamine hit, like we get from social media, like we get from drugs or gambling or one-night stands, hedonistic sex. There's a difference between hedonistic sex and sex with meaning. So I'm not knocking sex, by the way. We get a hit of dopamine, and then that excites our brain. That gives us a sensation of pleasure. Next time we want to experience that same pleasure, our brain says, okay, that was great, but it hurt the neurons. So we down-regulate the number of receptors in our brain for dopamine. So next time we want to experience that same pleasure, we need a bigger hit of dopamine. And then we down-regulate our receptors again. And then next time we need more. And this phenomenon is called tolerance. And this phenomenon is ultimately what leads to addiction. Whereas serotonin is inhibitory. It doesn't do that. There's no such thing as being addicted to happiness. So the point here is that anything that causes pleasure in its most extreme form leads to addiction. And addiction leads to depression and all sorts of mental health issues. And what we want to do, like, I'm not saying that we need to go away and all be monks and live in a monastery and avoid all temptation. I don't think that works practically in the modern world. But what we want to do is experience these pleasures from a position of strength, a position of stability, and indulge in the pleasures when we feel up to it, not when we're stressed, not when we're down and not feeling ourselves, not when we're feeling weak, and make better choices around the pleasures that we're indulging in. Because ultimately, dopamine down-regulates serotonin. We will find it almost impossible to be happy if our dopamine is going great guns. So ultimately, the pursuit of pleasure leads to the opposite of happiness. And I don't think that's something that we kind of all know. Intuitively we kind of get it, but we probably never sat down and deciphered it. It's one of my favourite quotes. Does anyone know who said this? Any guesses? Kid? Marcus Aurelius said it. I think kind of what he's saying is that physical health, the stuff that we've just been talking about, is really, really important. Of course it contributes to your mental health. But it can be taken away from you at any point. So it's a bit like living in a rented accommodation and making it a really nice rented accommodation. You've got a really nice house, but you rent it. Looking after your mental health is a bit like owning the house. Everything you invest in your mental health, and that can be physical health, will come back and reward you at some point. And so, last kind of point for me, a lot of you relate to this, I think. Working in this industry, owning a business in this industry, having the opportunity to manage staff, clients, it comes with a lot of pressure and it comes with a lot of stress. And it comes with a lot of challenges. And I think the most effective way for dealing with that, in terms of not letting it affect my mental health, has been to keep a really good perspective. And the best way that I've found to manage my perspective is this concept, is that success is important, but only if it brings you happiness. Has anyone seen the film The Hangover? It's not what you think. So in that film, there's this scene where they're driving to Vegas, and there's 4 lanes of traffic, and everyone's just flying towards Vegas as fast as they can. Just like a race to get to Vegas. And all around that road is the most beautiful scenery you'll ever see. And I've been there, I was there last year, and it's so beautiful, it's lovely. And I associate that scenery with happiness. And I associate Vegas with success. And I associate that road with our journey to success. And I feel like quite often we get caught up in this, whatever benchmark we've set ourselves of success. And we're so eager to get there. And we take these setbacks as like an interruption of our ability to get to that, whatever benchmark we've set ourselves. And we often forget that at any point we can just stop and experience whatever it is that brings us happiness, and just look and just be. And it sounds corny, it's probably why there's not that many men in here, because you won't get many men that will stand here and talk about this stuff. But to me, it helps me get perspective. If a client complains, if we miss a target, if something happens at work, you can always stop and go, but I've got a nice house. And having that bigger picture has just really helped me along the way, and it was just something I wanted to share with you guys. Lastly, I have a gift for everyone. Has anyone heard of the UN Global Goals? No? Cool. Well, that's what I'm going to talk about. There's 17 of them, and the UN have basically recognised that there's 17 things that we need to do as a planet to fix what's going on, essentially. One of those is good health and well-being, which is what this is all about. And the Together Band campaign is basically a campaign to promote the global goals. Obviously, it's an issue that no one in this room knew about them, and we want people to know about them. They're important. They cover all the bases, and Together Band's a campaign about that. This happens to be Good Health and Wellbeing Month, coincidentally. It wasn't planned, but it is. David Beckham is the face of the Good Health and Wellbeing campaign. He's got a green one. And the idea is that it's a bit like I was talking about at the start with the yellow and the blue team. If you're passionate about one of these goals, you buy a band, and each band comes with a pair, so you get your own band and you get a band to share with someone else. And the idea is that we champion the goal, and that we talk about it in our own communities, and we raise awareness locally, rather than, posting on social media sporadically. Talk to people that might also be engaged with it, and hopefully, if we all engage, then we can make a difference. And I'm obviously a champion for good health and well-being, and I wanted to share a pair of bands with everyone that came to my talk, so I'm going to hand them out. Actually, that'll take ages. Please come and grab one at the end. That works better. And that is the end. I'm just going to leave this slide up, because I know I said I wouldn't talk about tactics. I was more focusing on the whys, but these are some of the tactics that I implement personally in my own life that have been really effective for me. So we haven't got anyone coming in next, so if you want to rush off, by all means disappear. If you want to stay and ask some questions, my time is your time. Thanks a lot. Any questions? Yes. What are medicinal mushrooms? That's the exact question I got last time I did this. So they're not psychedelic mushrooms, for a start. Medicinal mushrooms are some of the most potent antioxidants that we know about in our food supply. For example, chaga is one medicinal mushroom. To give you an idea of how potent they are, someone said earlier that blueberries are really good for antioxidants, and that's a that's an idea that we all have. We all know blueberries are containing a lot of antioxidants, and they kind of do. They rank about 14 on the antioxidant scale. Chaga ranks about 300 on the antioxidant scale. So they're extremely powerful, and they're used lots in Chinese medicine. There's different mushrooms for finding focus, for being alert, for getting better sleep. And there's a really good book. This book, I think it's up there, Healing Mushrooms by Tero. I don't know how to say his second name. But I did read the book. That's a really good book if you're interested in learning a bit more.
Anyone?
Yeah, so the lady was asking if exercising early is better. As I say, with all of this stuff, it's subjective, and you've got to find what works for you. But if you exercise earlier in the morning, it helps your stress, sleep hormones get back into balance. So if you exercise late at night, you raise cortisol, and cortisol acts in the opposite direction to melatonin. Melatonin is our sleep hormone. So if you raise your cortisol at 7 p.m, you're going to find it a lot harder to get back to sleep and to get a really effective night's sleep. Whereas if you exercise early, you kind of reset your hormones to be in a healthy rhythm throughout the day. So yeah, if you do exercise in the evening, try and keep the intensity quite low. So like maybe go for a light jog or a walk or something like that. That's going to be absolutely fine. But if you do CrossFit or something like that, it's probably better to get that done in the morning.
Yeah, I found it the other way around because I was going in the morning and I was having worse night's sleep because I was getting up extra early to get in the morning.
Yeah.
So I split it to the evening and now I actually sleep better and I have more time as well.
And that's a perfect example of all of this stuff is always with the caveat of it's subjective. And if that's what you found, that's perfect. You don't be like, oh, but they do it that way. You found what works for you, and that's all that matters.
So I was literally getting up and dreading getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to the gym.
Yeah.
Whereas now I go after work, I'm not as tired.
Yeah, and that's perfect. That's a perfect example of kind of the underlying thing that I would like to get across today. It's like just be engaged in it, and you will work it out for yourself if you're engaged.
I sometimes have a feeling of wanting to be sort of better and fitter and sort of all these sorts of things, especially sort of like muscle, sort of training and building muscle, that kind of thing, how it's sort of strength is becoming much more important. I also have a feeling that if I don't do those things, or if I have a free weekend and I think, oh, I'm definitely going to do some movement and this, and I don't do it, I have the guilt of that. And sometimes I think, is the guilt and the pressure detrimental to mental health worse than not doing doing the physical thing that? Yeah. So I wondered if you have a way of balancing sort of, you want to obviously drive yourself and you want to motivate yourself, but sometimes the guilt of not doing those things can have a detrimental effect on the way you feel about it. Do you have a way of balancing?
I can give you my personal experience for sure, and it's something that I think everyone suffers with, is like the feeling that you should be doing more, and that for me is the biggest cause of stress. For me is like feeling like I should be doing that and I'm not. And my approach to it when it comes to exercise, and it's going to sound a little bit cutthroat potentially, is if the excuse is that I'm just being lazy, I won't accept it. If I'm really honest with myself, I know whether it's I just need the rest or whether I'm just being a bit lazy. And I'll try not to accept that. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you're like, I'm just going to, But yeah, obviously on those situations, we don't want to make ourselves feel guilty. That's not productive at all. But if we can limit those situations where you kind of know you should be going, then just get it done in those situations. But I think that you've got to be honest with yourself. Are you not going because you're tired? And if that's the case, don't go. You're better off getting a good night's sleep. You're better off resting and recuperating and being in a parasympathetic state than kind of introducing more stress. So, yeah.
And you always feel better after you've gone and done it.
You always do, generally, if you did it for the right reason. And that's a really important point, because if you don't, then that's a sign that you're potentially overtraining.
overtraining syndrome is if you train and you feel worse, that's a really good sign that you're doing a bit too much. So, you know, just pay attention to that piece as well. Yeah.
I found a social media detox in the week actually helped. Because I found like I was like, oh my god, I need to do this, I need to do that. But I've detoxed social media in the week, so I just delete the app and then just go on it at the weekend and then do it again.
Social media. So what we were talking about, dopamine and serotonin. So social media is the biggest contributor to constant dopamine hits, and it's if I'm being entirely honest, it's probably the thing that I struggle with the most personally, because there's so much of my life is on the phone. I'm constant, and it's so easy to flick to Instagram, flick to Facebook, and I think that's a great tactic. I personally know it's one of those things that's in the back of my mind that I know that I need to do, but I haven't yet, and I think it can be really effective. I personally haven't seen anyone that's done a social media detox and gone, oh, that was a waste of time. Everyone's literally gone, it was brilliant. And
Your battery lasts longer as well.
any other questions, guys?
You've got intermittent. Sorry, you've got intermittent fasting on there, but I always thought fasting was a no-go.
There you go. So this is a good question. So it's not for everyone, and actually the science says that it's probably more effective for men than it is for women, because if you think about it, back in hunter-gatherer times, women would predominantly be gathering, men would go out hunting, and men would tend to go longer without food. So we've kind of evolved and become a bit more accustomed to going longer without food than women have. So it's one of those things that, again, you need to try it to see if it works for you. The reason why it's got a lot of positive science behind it is because it kind of gives your body a rest.